Hey guys, welcome back. This is the MMA breakdown. Today we're doing predictions for UFC Fight Night 65, Miocic versus Hunt. Top to bottom, not crazy about this card. Not all of the matchups are great, but the main event is very good, especially for a Fight Pass card. Miocic versus Hunt. Really looking forward to that fight, and also the co-main event I think is really flying under the radar. And another fight that I'm really looking forward to in Tavares versus Whittaker. But this card for me actually does more and gets me more excited than UFC 186 did. So I don't think that's a good thing for the UFC. The Fight Pass cards are more interesting than some of the pay-per-views, but I am looking forward to the top fights on this card. Alright, starting off with the UFC Fight Pass preliminary card at flyweight, Alvey and Illich versus Ben Newan. Ben Newan, a newcomer, so I'm not going to make a pick here, but Illich, in his debut, he beat Darren Uyenoyama, got a couple of takedowns, and then lost a decision to Louis Smolka in his last fight, or in his next fight after that, and in his last fight got finished by John Lineker. Didn't look good in either of those fights, was really dominated by Smolka. A lot of his takedowns were stuffed and reversed, and on the feet he was outstruck, and Lineker just had a big striking advantage on him. Seems to have kind of mediocre, average wrestling and striking skills, so if Ben Newan is a typical newcomer, really green, then I would expect Illich to win, but Illich I don't think is a high level flyweight, so I don't know, but not going to make a pick. And moving on, a welterweight fight, Vick Grujic versus Brendan O'Reilly. I'm definitely taking Grujic here. I think he should be a big favorite. Both these guys are veterans from the same tough season of Tough Nations, and I didn't watch either of these guys in the house, but I have seen their fights in the UFC after the show. And Grujic lost at the finale to Nordine Taleb, got badly out-wrestled, was just taken down all day in a real ugly fight. And his next fight got a really nice win over another Tough Nations contestant, Chris Illich. I believe that was a first round stoppage. Late first round. Looked great on the feet. Got the finish there. I think he almost got a rear naked choke finish, but it was a TKO finish. And then in his last fight against Chris Clements, came out swinging wild punches, hurt Clements, but ended up getting knocked out himself in the exchange. And Brendan O'Reilly, he fought Zhang Lipeng in his last fight. I believe that was his only fight after the show, and just looked terrible. Got dominated, was taken down, got opened up, had a cut opened up on him at one point, was ground and pounded on, and looked very poor. So Grujic, being a far more aggressive fighter, having shown a lot more ability in his couple of fights than O'Reilly did in his loss, have to go with Grujic, a really wild, aggressive striker, and I think a fun fighter to watch, but I'm definitely going with Grujic big here. I think he gets an early finish. Next up at women's strawweight, Alex Chambers versus Kailin Curran. I'm going to go with Curran here. Don't know, we haven't seen much of these ladies from the UFC. Alex Chambers from Tough 20. She lost to Rose Namajunas in the first round, got submitted, and then in the finale lost to Aisling Daly, got armbarred. I believe that was in the first round. So we just haven't seen much of her game, and it's coming off of 2 first round losses. Whereas Kailin Curran put a pretty strong showing on against Paige Van Zandt in her debut, and obviously now with Paige Van Zandt's most recent win over Felice Herrig, I think that that performance carries a little more merit, even though she was finished in that fight. She was able to get on top of Van Zandt several times. Had a little bit of trouble with Van Zandt's guard, but just seemed pretty well-rounded. Not really great anywhere, but was hanging in there with Van Zandt and exchanging with her on the ground and on the feet for a while. So I thought she looked pretty decent, and like I said, Chambers has just been finished pretty easily in her last 2 fights. So I'm going to go with Kylan here. Moving on, middleweight fight, Dylan Andrews versus Brad Scott. This is kind of a weird fight to me. Both guys tough veterans, and their UFC careers after this show have not panned out for either of them, really. Brad Scott has been pretty inactive. This is his first fight in over a year. Fought last March, I think, that was his last fight. And Dylan Andrews, coming off of a couple of bad losses. He was on Tough 17. Had the knockout over Pavia Betty in a fight he was getting dominated in, and just kind of had a Hail Mary knockout right at the end of it. And then lost to Clint Hester in a really uneventful fight. Didn't really get going. That was he dislocated his shoulder. And then his last fight against Sam Alvey, on his own takedown attempt, Alvey was able to lock his leg in a way that made Andrews land on his head and basically knocked himself out on his own takedown attempt. Really kind of bizarre, and I don't know, when stuff like that happens, kind of similar to Jamie Varner's loss to Drew Dober. I can't trust a fighter after that, so I don't really know how to feel about Andrews. He had a nice win in the Tough House against Zach Cummins, and then lost to Uriah Hall, got finished. Kind of an aggressive fighter, not really a technical striker, more kind of a wild brawler. And against Alvey was really tying him up in the clinch, looking to close the distance and latch onto him and drag him to the ground, but seemed a little too lackadaisical about it, and it ended up costing him. And Brad Scott hasn't been too active. He was from Tough Smashes, like I said, hasn't fought in over a year. Against Claudio Silva in his last fight, was taken down, held down, pretty much dominated. Had some moments on the feet, but couldn't really sustain any effective offense and couldn't stop the takedowns. Had a nice front choke win over Michael Kuiper before that. Finished him early. I liked that. And then lost the Tough Smashes finale fight to Robert Whittaker. Lost a decision there. I'm going to go with Dylan Andrews here. I think a little more well-rounded, has some different tools to use with the grappling and the striking. And Brad Scott, I just don't like his activity, and kind of a one-dimensional fighter, kind of an average kickboxer he seems to be, and doesn't seem too athletic. So I'm going to go with Andrews, but with that bizarre loss he had last time out, I don't know if I can trust him, but I'll go with Andrews. Next up, women's strawweight fight, Beck Rawlings versus Lisa Ellis. I'm going to go with Beck Rawlings, but this is another kind of 50-50 fight for me. Beck Rawlings surprisingly lost in her last fight in the finale to Heather Jo Clark. Got dominated, couldn't stop the takedown, couldn't keep it on the feet at all. On the show, though, her fight against Tisha Torres, I think I remember scoring that for her. I'm not certain that I did, but I believe that I scored that fight for Rawlings. And Lisa Ellis got finished in a dominant fashion by Jessica Penne on the show, but then had a pretty good grappling affair with Felice Herrig in the finale, and was able to hold her own for a little bit on the ground. There were a lot of back and forth scrambles, had Herrig in some submissions, but she ultimately got submitted. So if this can get on the ground, I could see Ellis having some success just because of how bad Rawlings was dominated in her last fight on the ground. But I'm going to go with Rawlings. I believe she's the bigger fighter, and I just think she's shown a more well-rounded game, so I'll go with Rawlings. And middleweight, Dan Kelly versus Sam Alvey. This should be a really fun fight. I love that they seem to both kind of made this fight on their own, called each other out on Twitter and that stuff. But Dan Kelly, Tough Nations veteran. I didn't see his fights, any of his fights in the house. I think he won his first fight, but fought Luke Zacharich in the last Australia card in November, and I thought he just looked great. It was a really fun performance. Just came out hot out of the gate and kind of bulldozed Zacharich, closed the distance, was throwing big punches, was able to take him down and finish him off with a Kimura. I thought it was a really kind of awesome showing. Showed good aggressive striking and finished him off with the submission on the ground. But then his last fight against Patrick Walsh was really kind of terrible. A very uneventful fight, and just didn't seem to have any of that aggression or eagerness to look for the finish that he showed against Zacharich. Looked very hesitant on the feet and didn't look to take Walsh down at all, and I think that's because he wasn't willing to go to the ground with him, because Walsh is a dominant wrestler. But Sam Alvey had a great knockout last time out over Cesar Ferreira. Was getting dominated, not dominated in the sense that he was in danger of getting hurt, but couldn't find his range or rhythm on the feet. Was eating a lot of kicks and jabs from Ferreira, and then lost his debut fight to Tom Watson. Was just kind of outworked on the feet, and then we talked about the win over Dylan Andrews, where he was getting tied up on the feet in the clinch, but then defended the takedown of Andrews, made him land on his head and knocked himself out. I don't know about Sam Alvey. I mean, obviously has great power and he's kind of able to create the finish out of nowhere, even when it looks like he's losing the fight. If Dan Kelly can put in a performance like he did against Zacharich, I think he has a more well-rounded game, more skills. I think he could get the win. But after that last fight against Patrick Walsh, where he did not look good on the feet, I think I got to go with Alvey. And Kelly is also quite old, I think, for an MMA fighter, 37, and Alvey has got to be, he's only 28, so. Big youth advantage for Alvey. I think he can test that chin of Kelly with his power. I'm going with Alvey, but I wouldn't count out Kelly too much. But we'll go with Alvey. Next up, at welterweight, Kyle Noke versus Jonathan Webb. Webb, a newcomer that I don't know. Kyle Noke really disappointed me in his last fight against Patrick Cote. That was at the Tough Nations finale, coached against him on the show, and just got dominated, taken down over and over again, couldn't do anything about it. Kyle Noke was a veteran of Tough 11, and I actually kind of had some hope for him with some of his early fights in the UFC. I remember he had a nice submission win over Kamosi early on. Lost to Andrew Craig, though, in Craig's debut fight. Was the same thing as a Cote fight. He was able to take him down and out-wrestle him for a pretty dominant win. And then had a knockout over Charlie Brenneman, where I thought his striking looked pretty crisp and improved. So, but then he was out for the show and was pretty inactive and hasn't fought in over a year. So, I don't really know what to make of Noke. Who knows how he'll look this time out after being out for pretty long. But yeah, I'm not going to make a pick. If Webb is a really bright prospect, I don't have any problem seeing how he could take out Noke. but I don't know. And Noak also had that submission loss to Ed Herman a couple years ago, so hasn't really panned out for him. And yeah, I can't make a pick here. So moving on to featherweight, Hatsu Hioki versus Dan Hooker. Dan Hooker, to me, has no business being in this fight against Hioki. I'm taking Hioki. I think he should be a big favorite here. I liked Hooker's his debut win over Ian Entwistle, where he defended the ankle lock and then pounded him out with elbows. It was a fun performance, but not really all that meaningful, and didn't tell us much. And then in his last fight against, what's the guy's name? Oh God, the Venezuelan guy, I'm blanking on his name, Maximo Blanco. He just looked terrible on the feet, really got a beating put on him. Blanco was just able to kind of stand in front of him and pot shot him all day, and Hooker's striking looked very amateurish. So got to go with Hioki. You know, his UFC career early on had some nice promising performances over George Roop, Bart Palashevsky. I thought he won the fight against Ricardo Lamas, was in top position a lot, but then had some bad losses to Guida, Darren Elkins, got the win over Ivan Menjivar, and was looking good in his last fight against Charles Oliveira. Took his back at one point, which was pretty surprising, but then ended up getting choked out. So his hype bubble has been burst, I think, at least for me. You know, has good control on the ground if he's able to impose that. Has okay striking, but seems kind of not very athletic, kind of uncoordinated on the feet. Had a nice body kick on Darren Elkins that hurt him, but I do think he is still a far more skilled fighter than Dan Hooker, and there's really no reason to take Hooker here, I think. So I'm going to take Hioki to win a decision. Yeah. All right, moving on to the main card at lightweight, Jake Matthews versus James Vick. This, to me, is a really fun fight. I should have mentioned this at the top of the card, but Jake Matthews, he fought on the last two Australia cards, or the last one in Sydney and then the one before that in New Zealand. And in this day and age of the UFC, where you know they're just running cards every weekend almost, and you know they're debuting fighters all the time, new guys coming in every card. Jake Matthews is a guy that I look forward to seeing him fight now, and he's kind of I've just taken an interest in him. I thought his last two performances were really fun, and more than that, I just think that these Australia cards have been really fun. I didn't think that the one in New Zealand was going to be that good. That was last June, but I really enjoyed it. Yeah, but I'm just mentioning that to say that I think these Australia cards have been really fun, and I've kind of become a sucker for them. And Jake Matthews is a guy that has kind of grown with that Australian scene, and I really look forward to his fights. But Jake Matthews versus James Vick, this is a really interesting fight because Jake Matthews, I think he has a lot of raw potential, but kind of raw athleticism. He looks massive for the weight class. One of these guys that kind of looks like a lab specimen. He just looks huge and really uses that size very effectively and uses it to his full advantage. Against Deshaun Johnson in his debut, you know, on the feet, was at a disadvantage, but every time that Johnson was getting the upper hand, Matthews would just close the distance, run him back into the fence, and put his weight and size on him and just wear on him, kind of John Jones style, and ended up finishing the fight with a triangle choke. And then his next fight against Wagner Hocha, who is a very decorated grappler, was able to do really the same thing, impose his size on him, beat him up on the ground, and finished him off with a rear naked choke, I think, or maybe a power guillotine. rear naked choke, but really uses that size to his advantage. Has won both fights by submission, but his striking does look subpar. And James Vick, I think, is going to have a skill advantage everywhere. Very long, kind of the opposite build of Matthews. He's pretty tall for the weight class too, but doesn't have that massive frame. A pretty lanky guy. He's also used that length to his advantage. Had a nice power guillotine over Ramsey Nijam. And then in his fight against Valmir Lazaro, I thought his striking looked really sloppy, but landed enough to get the win. And then his last fight against Nick Hine, Nick Hine was able to drop him a few times, get inside the reach, and then off of the knockdowns was able to control him on the ground. So I think Matthews is going to be able to impose that size on Vick here, take him down, clinch with him, press him against the fence, that sort of thing. But if Vick can create space, use that rangy striking, if he can scramble well and attack with submissions, I definitely see him being able to get the win because he's the more skilled fighter. But I'm going to go with Matthews. He's just looked real hungry. He's a surging young fighter, has a lot of momentum, and I just think he uses that size. Vick also in the tough house really struggled with Michael Chiesa's grappling, was dominating the whole fight, and then with about, I think it was 10 seconds left, just got taken down and pounded out. So the grappling needs a lot of work, and I think Matthews can exploit that. So I'm going to take Matthews to win a decision. Next up at light heavyweight, Anthony Perosh versus Sean O'Connell. This is another fight I think can be really fun. Not the most relevant guys, but Perosh, one of these older aged fighters that's just hanging around, but has really kind of earned his keep in the UFC. He's 42, but hasn't really showed any signs of slowing down, aside from the drubbing he took against Ryan Bader. But even in that fight, I think it was kind of impressive that he was able to last the whole time, eating as many shots as he did from a far more skilled and younger fighter in Bader. But he's very effective at imposing his grappling game, getting guys to the ground and then getting the submission there. Did that against Cyril Diabate, Nick Penner, knocked out Vinny Magalhaes on the feet in the opening seconds of the fight. And then his last fight against Guto in Ascench did the same thing. Not a guy who struggles to get it to the ground to work his submission game, but is actually effective in getting the fight there. Also had a knockout loss to Ryan Jimmo very early in the fight, opening seconds a couple years ago. But other than the Jimmo and Bader loss, has been pretty successful in the UFC against marginal guys, I'll admit. But Sean O'Connell, I don't know if he's really that much higher level of opponent than some of the guys that Perosh has beaten. Sean O'Connell also got knocked out by Ryan Jimmo in his debut, and then I thought he won his next fight against John Vellante. I thought he kind of got robbed. And his last fight against Matt Van Buren was losing early, really struggling with the more kind of technical range and dynamic striking of Van Buren, but then Van Buren gassed and O'Connell was able to take over with haymakers and put him out. He's really a wild brawler. His striking is kind of sloppy, but seems to push a good pace and throws a high volume. If Perosh can't get it to the ground, I definitely think O'Connell has a good chance of winning and will have a big advantage on the feet. But I do think Perosh will be able to get it to the ground and work his submission game from there. O'Connell doesn't seem like a really highly skilled fighter to me, so I think Perosh is still savvy enough, has that wily, he's that wily veteran, smart fighter who I think can sub O'Connell here. So I'm taking Perosh by submission. Next up in the co-main event, a fight that I'm very excited for. I think is really flying under the radar. Brad Tavares versus Robert Whittaker. Oh man, did Whittaker look awesome in his last fight or what? I thought he just looked amazing. Knocking out Clint Hester, finishing him was it the first round? I believe it was. Second round, but still very, very impressive. This is a guy who's kind of high on, won tough smashes, had some nice performances, finished Colton Smith. I thought he looked good in the fight against Court McGee, but lost a decision there, and then got knocked out by Stephen Thompson after that, and then had a win over Mike Rhodes, but even in that fight, just barely did enough to win. It wasn't a dominant win, and Mike Rhodes was able to get his shots in. And then moving up to middleweight, I thought the weight class change wouldn't work out for Whittaker, but I was very wrong. He looked completely refreshed and rejuvenated at middleweight. Looked like a completely different fighter. Really aggressive, threw with authority. He was never that aggressive at welterweight, and just stood there and traded with Hester. I knew he would be the more technical striker, but I didn't think he'd have the power or the willingness to stand in the pocket and trade. And he hurt Hester and just took him out. It was really kind of eye-opening. And I think this fight is going to come down. It's going to come down to Whittaker's power versus Tavares's volume and kind of more tactical kickboxing. Brad Tavares, coming off of the win over Nate Marquardt, looked good. Probably the best he's ever looked. I also thought in the fight against Tim Boetsch, he was looking the best he ever had before getting knocked out. And had the loss to Yoel Romero. Was on a 5-fight win streak before that, but in that win streak didn't finish anybody. Was just getting decisions over guys and wasn't really looking dominant in his wins. Just improving at a very slow rate, fight to fight, marginally improving, just looking slightly better fight to fight, not really adding new skills, never really mixes in any takedowns. But it has become a pretty polished and talented kickboxer. I think his hand speed and volume is improving, and if he can, drag this fight out, go the distance, I favor Tavares, but I don't think he's going to be able to last again with Whittaker's newfound power. Boetsch was able to put him out with kind of a lucky shot. And Whittaker, as aggressive as he was against Hester, and Hester was not anywhere near the level of kickboxer that Tavares is, but still I think with Whittaker's aggression and his combinations now, I think he's going to be able to hurt Tavares. I really do. And I got to go with Whittaker. I think he just looked really good in his last fight, and Tavares is just kind of slowly moving along and is really yet to have that breakout performance. So I'm going to go with Whittaker. And then the main event, heavyweight Stipe Miocic versus Mark Hunt. What a great fight. Such a great main event for Fight Pass. And a really close fight, I think. Really hard to call. Initially, I was going with Hunt to win this, but now I think I'm leaning towards Miocic. One thing to consider here, I think, is really important. Miocic in his last fight against Junior Dos Santos, I didn't think he would win that fight. I picked Dos Santos to knock him out early in the first round. And I still think if he had faced the Dos Santos of old, he would have suffered that knockout. But, he rose to the occasion. He looked great. Was able to press Dos Santos, kind of used a similar strategy that Kane did. Walking back into the fence, throw some big haymakers and work those takedowns. But in the same way that Dos Santos looked severely diminished in that fight against Miocic. Miocic took a pretty massive beating in that fight as well, even though you know, he almost won it and some people probably scored it for him. He took a lot of punishment in that fight, almost got knocked out himself on several occasions, and you know, I wonder going into this fight if he's gonna look like a severely diminished version of himself, just like Dos Santos did against him from the beatings he took from Kane. I think that's a possibility. And Mark Hunt, also, you know, suffering his fair share of knockouts in his last couple of fights. The fight against Roy Nelson, I thought he looked amazing. The way he took him out early, and that was a first round finish, I believe, wasn't it? Let me check real quick. Second round finish, but took him out easily. You know, through great combinations, and his striking looked real clean and crisp. But also, you know, struggled against Bigfoot. You know, was rocked a few times. Got knocked out by Dos Santos in that fight, and then obviously got knocked out in his last fight by Verdum. So Mark Hunt's chin, I think, is, you know, it's fair to say it's probably compromised at this point. Miocic's knockout power, saw that against Fabio Maldonado. But Miocic, you know, taking a lot of punishment from Dos Santos, and also got knocked out years ago by Stefan Struve. So, you know, it's kind of hard to say who's gonna, you know, who's gonna be more shop worn here. But Miocic is the younger fighter, and I do think that if he can use that crisp jab, use the same strategy used against Roy Nelson, kind of land a jab, circle, get out of the way. I think, you know, he can be more mobile than Mark Hunt. Mark Hunt, being the older fighter, the heavier fighter, will probably gas earlier. I think, you know, Miocic can win in that way, and also has the wrestling that he can go to, where Hunt's always really had trouble. So I'm going to go with Miocic, but, you know, I think Hunt really looked great against Nelson, and if he can, you know, keep this fight on the feet, if he can stand in front of Miocic and land some of those big shots, I certainly think he has the power to put out Miocic. You know, Miocic can also, I think, put out Hunt, but not as likely. Really kind of an even fight. I think it's going to be really competitive, but I got to go with Miocic. Just has some more tools, and I think just being the younger fighter, and the more athletic fighter, he's going to be able to, you know, get in, jab, get out, and stay away from Hunt's power. So I'm going to go with Miocic. I'm going to go with decision, but if Hunt gasses, I think Miocic can capitalize late and get a finish there. So I'm going to go with Miocic, but not a confident pick. I definitely think Hunt has a real chance to win here. All right, guys. Well, those are my predictions for UFC Fight Night 65, Miocic versus Hunt. I will be back very soon with my predictions for the Edgar versus Faber Fight Night. But thank you guys for watching. Please like the video and subscribe. Take care. I'll see you guys later. Bye.